The great auditorium of the Reinhardt Concert Hall had never been this silent. 2,000 people in the finest evening dress in the city sat frozen in the red velvet tiers, programs limp in their laps, and not one of them was breathing. Under the vast gilded ceiling, beneath the single word carved in gold above the stage, Reinhardt, a name that in certain rooms meant more than any government seal. The centenary gala that all of Europe had tuned in to watch had simply stopped. On the podium, a young man in white tie stood with both arms raised, baton trembling. And behind him, 100 musicians sat with their instruments frozen in their hands. And in the wings, in a plain gray work coat with a polishing cloth still hanging from one pocket, stood the old man they had spent all week calling the tuner. The silent technician they had ordered to fix a sticking pedal, carry the podium, and stay out of the light. He was not shouting. He was not even angry. He simply lifted a small brass tuning fork, worn smooth from 60 years in one hand, struck it once against the iron frame of the piano, and into the shocked hush he let the single true note ring, and said the words that would end Sebastian Falk's entire world. Stop. Every note you have heard tonight is a lie, and I would know. I wrote the first one this orchestra ever played. A phone lay face up on the stage manager's desk in the wings, its screen still glowing from the call that had just ended, the call that had turned the most powerful people in the hall the color of ash. The president of the Musicians' Union would not lift her eyes. The hall's managing director had gripped the edge of the console to stay upright. And Sebastian Falk, the golden boy whose face was on every poster in the city, who had spent the week treating this old man like something the cleaners had left behind, finally understood exactly whose house he had been standing in.
To understand how a man in a second-hand work coat silenced the biggest concert in 100 years in front of 2,000 witnesses and a live broadcast to half of Europe, and why every powerful person in that hall was suddenly terrified of him, we have to go back. Back a few days to a loading dock, a dark stage, and the first cruel thing Sebastian Falk said to the man he thought was nobody. The empty stage of the Reinhardt Concert Hall smelled of rosin, floor wax, and old spruce, and Anton Reinhardt loved all three. He stood alone at the great concert grand in the half-dark before dawn, 79 years old, lean and unhurried, with reading glasses pushed up into thin white hair and a tuning wrench in one steady hand. Around him rose the quiet architecture of a hall the audience never saw from this side, the forest of empty music stands, the risers waiting for the cellos, the vast pipe organ asleep behind the stage, and above it all the gold letters he never looked at directly anymore. He was tuning the piano the slow way, the honest way, one string at a time, by ear, and every few minutes he would strike the little brass fork, listen to the beats fade, and nudge a pin a hair's breadth until the notes sat perfectly still in the air. He liked the empty hall. Here, before the lights and the cameras, nobody performed. A note was just a note. It was either true or it wasn't. Because the old man tuning the piano was not really the hired tuner.
His full name, the name carved in gold above the stage, the name printed on a century of programs, was Anton Reinhardt. And the orchestra that was about to celebrate its 100th year was his. 50 years earlier, he had built it out of nothing. A handful of half-starved players in a rented rehearsal room, a borrowed podium, and a refusal to compromise a single phrase. He had turned it into one of the great orchestras of the world, a name spoken in the same breath as Vienna and Berlin. In the small, ferociously particular world of serious music, the word Reinhardt on a program had meant for 50 years a performance that was exactly what it claimed to be. Every note played live, by human hands, to a standard no money could shortcut. And the man who had made that name mean something was standing in his own hall, in a borrowed gray coat, pretending to be nobody. You can counterfeit the applause, his old teacher used to say. You cannot counterfeit a single honest note.
That teacher was the reason Anton was standing there at all. 65 years earlier, he had been a hungry boy of 14, sleeping in a train station, when a fierce, half-forgotten old Kapellmeister named Elias Hoffman had caught him with his ear pressed to the stage door of a rehearsal hall, drinking in music he could never afford a ticket to hear. Hoffman had taken him in, fed him, and taught him everything. How an orchestra breathes together like one animal. How a true phrase carries the small, living imperfections of human beings playing at the edge of their skill. How the ear is the last honest judge that no fashion and no fortune can bribe. A concert is a promise, Hoffman had told him once, pressing a worn brass tuning fork into his palm. It says, 100 people spent their whole lives learning this, and tonight they will give you their hands, honestly, for 2 hours. Break that promise, mime it, fake it, sell the audience a recording and call it live, and every true concert ever played is worth a little less. So you never do it. And Anton had learned the hardest way what happened when someone did. Late in his life, Elias Hoffman had written one great symphony of his own, and a smooth impresario had taken the manuscript to promote it, then premiered it under a younger, more fashionable conductor's name, buried Hoffman's part in the story, and let the old man be remembered as a footnote, a difficult failure who died in a cold, rented room while the thief grew rich and celebrated. Standing at his teacher's small, nearly empty funeral, a young Anton had made a promise that he would build an orchestra money could not bend, a place that would always protect the players, the 100 pairs of hands who actually make the music, the ones whose names never fit on the poster. He spent 50 years keeping it. That was why, at 79, he still knew how to tune a piano by ear. It was why he was here.
Because 3 weeks earlier, 2 things had arrived at the quiet lake house where the world believed Anton Reinhardt had gone to die. The first was a thick folder of legal papers, the sale of the Reinhardt Philharmonic and its hall to a global entertainment group, a deal so large it would fold a century of music into a stranger's content library forever, and it could not close, his old lawyer had reminded him, without his personal signature, because he had never surrendered the one thing he owned outright, the name and the founding trust behind it. The second was a plain envelope with no return address, sent by someone frightened, containing a scrap of paper and a small audio recorder. On the paper, a single photograph, the title page of a symphony manuscript in the archive, his manuscript, with someone else's name freshly inked across the top. Anton had listened to that recording 3 times before the back of his neck went cold. Someone was about to sell 2,000 people a fake at the biggest concert in the history of his orchestra and put his name over it. So he had done what he always did when the truth was buried somewhere a lawyer's letter could not reach. He had put on a plain coat, taken a freelance piano technician's credential under his mother's maiden name, and gone to see with his own eyes and his own ears what his orchestra had become before he signed it away. Into that first gray morning, the young man who would define his week arrived the way he always did, in a wave of noise.
The stage door banged open, and Sebastian Falk swept in where the working crew were not used to seeing him. Sunglasses on indoors, a phone in one hand, and an assistant trailing behind. He was 34, magazine handsome, the celebrated artistic director and heir of the Reinhardt Philharmonic, the youngest star ever to headline its podium, a conductor whose face sold out halls and whose every gesture was filmed. The centenary gala was to be his coronation, the night the world agreed he was a genius and the true inheritor of a legend. He looked around the stage for someone to use, and his eyes landed on the nearest man in a work coat, Anton. "You, whatever your name is." He held out an empty coffee cup without looking. "There's a pedal on this piano that squeaks. Fix it, and while you're at it, the podium needs moving downstage. I want my mark under the center light, not where the old fossil used to stand. He glanced up, took in the gray coat, the tuning wrench, the reading glasses, and a slow, delighted smile spread across his face. The smile of a man who has found something to be amused by. God, look at you. They really do keep the old relics down here with the mops, don't they? What are you, 100? Were you here when they poured the foundations? Anton did not take the cup. I tune the instruments, he said mildly. The coffee's in the green room, and I wouldn't move that podium. The acoustic center of this stage is 2 steps upstage of the light. Whoever built the hall put the conductor where the sound gathers, not where the camera likes him.
Sebastian lowered his sunglasses an inch, as if seeing him for the first time, and his smile sharpened. His assistant winced. Let me explain how this works, since clearly nobody has. There are people whose name goes on the poster. That's me. And there are the people who carry the chairs and screw in the felt. That's you. The hands don't get opinions, Grandpa. He set the empty cup down on the piano's polished lid, right on the wood. Coffee. Green room. Anton looked at the cup sweating a ring onto the lid of an instrument worth more than a house, and then at the young man, and did not move to pick it up. I'll remember, he said. He held Sebastian's gaze one long second, long enough that something uncertain flickered behind the young man's eyes, some small unease he didn't like. And then he simply lifted the cup off the wood, wiped the lid with the cloth from his pocket, struck his little brass fork, and went back to listening to a string. It was the way he wasn't afraid of him that made Sebastian decide right there to heat him. Across the stage, an older man setting out the cello chairs looked up and quietly took the whole thing in. Joseph Brandt was 64, the orchestra's principal cellist, its solo cellist. 40 years in the section, the man whose warm, unhurried tone had anchored the strings through 4 decades, and half the great recordings the orchestra had ever made. His hands had shaped more music than most conductors would ever dream of. He could find the center of a note in the dark, and had taught half the cellists in the country. The young players adored him. He kept a tin of pear drops in his case, and a level head in every crisis. He waited until Sebastian had swept off toward the lighting desk, then crossed to the piano and set one of the suites down on the bench beside Anton. Don't mind him, Joseph said. That one arrived famous and never learned the rest. You eaten yet? You've the look of a man who forgets. I'll eat, Anton said, which was what he always said. You'll faint, Joseph corrected, in the exact tone of a stern younger brother, and nudged the suite an inch closer. Long week, not on an empty stomach. Anton smiled, a real one, the kind almost no one got to see anymore. For all the money and fame pouring through the building, this man had been kinder to a stranger he took for a broke old freelancer in 10 seconds than most of the celebrated people Anton had conducted across 50 years had ever been to anyone. Joseph Brandt did not know he was being kind to the man who had founded the orchestra, who had hired his teacher, whose baton had once given him his very first entrance as a nervous young player. That was exactly why it counted. Anton watched his hands settle the end pin of a cello, sure, honest, unhurried, and thought, at least one thing I built is still standing. He noticed the old cellist the way he noticed a perfectly centered note, a true thing, in a structure he was beginning to suspect had gone rotten at the top. He met the second good soul an hour later, at the back of the second violins. Una Park was 23, a substitute player on a temporary contract, tuning her violin with the tight, careful precision of someone who could not afford one wrong move. Anton knew that posture, someone who sent most of a modest fee home, in Una's case to a mother and a younger brother in another country, and lay awake at night terrified that one wrong word from the wrong person could end the little foothold she had. When a section leader snapped at her for a bowing she hadn't been told about, and she flinched and knocked her music to the floor, the pages fanning across the stage while a colleague sighed loudly, Anton crouched and helped her gather them, unhurried. first time with this orchestra?" he asked. "Is it that obvious?" she whispered.
"You already did the hard part," Anton said, ordering the pages and handing them back in order. "You walked into a hall full of legends, terrified, and you're playing the notes anyway. That's the whole craft." He smiled. "Your tuning's honest, by the way. You tune to the note, not to the person next to you who's a little sharp." Yuna laughed, surprised, grateful, and something in her shoulders dropped an inch. What Anton did not say, because he could not yet, was that he had a very good guess who had mailed a frightened envelope with a photograph and a recorder to a lake house 3 weeks before. He said nothing, but he filed away Yuna's carefulness beside Yosef's kindness and had no idea yet how much both would matter before the week was out. Kindness, Elias Hoffman used to say, is the one instrument that never needs tuning, and it always plays the decisive note when you least expect it. He had no idea how hard the next few days were about to test all of it. If you want to understand how much power a 34-year-old can have when no one has ever told him no, you only had to watch Sebastian Falk move through the Reinhardt concert hall in the week before the gala. Doors were held. The good dressing room was kept at his preferred temperature. A rehearsal was pushed an hour because he wanted the light on the poster in the lobby changed first. He had arrived at the orchestra a genuine talent and a manufactured legend, signed young by a management company that knew a face sells more tickets than a phrase. And somewhere along the way, he had stopped hearing the music and started hearing the applause. He had also, though the players did not yet know it, inherited a problem the size of the building. The foundation was nearly broke, propped up on loans and the promise of one enormous sale. He wore his certainty like his watch, expensive, always visible, telling everyone a time that suited only him. He believed the rules were a thing that happened to smaller people, the ones who carried the chairs. And from the moment he arrived that week, he made the people who actually made the music his entertainment. It started small, the way cruelty always does. On the first afternoon, Anton carried the tuned Podium 2 steps upstage to its acoustic mark. Sebastian, holding court for 2 visiting board members, made him carry it back down to the camera line, while he explained loudly that this is exactly the trouble with the old hands. They think the concert is for the room, when everyone with any sense knows the concert is for the broadcast. He left the Podium wrong, and as a joke, dropped a coin on the piano lid. "For the labor," he said. Anton, who could have ended the young man's career with a single phone call, only said, "I'll leave the coin with the green room tips," and set it down on a music stand on his way past. It cost him nothing to keep his voice level. It cost Sebastian more than he knew to be watched that closely by a man taking notes he could not see. Then, the music itself became the stage. Because here was the thing that truly drove Sebastian that week. The gala had to be enormous. He had staked everything. The foundation's survival, his own legend, the sale he was about to sign, on the centenary being hailed as the arrival of a genius who had reawakened a sleeping institution. And so he swept through the hall, demanding the sound be bigger, the tempos more spectacular, the whole thing grander and glossier and more certain than 100 fragile humans could deliver live. He never once asked the only question that mattered, the question a stage full of frightened professionals was too afraid to raise aloud, whether what the audience would hear on the night was actually going to be them, played live, the way the name above the stage had promised for 100 years. One person had tried to ask it. Her name was Elsa Brenner, the hall's audio director, the woman who ran the sound, who signed the technical certification that the broadcast was a true live acoustic performance. Anton first saw her on the second day, in the glass control booth at the back of the stalls, arguing quietly and hopelessly with the managing director. "I'm telling you I won't put my name to it," Elsa was saying, keeping her voice down.
You want me to run a full studio recording through the house speakers under a live broadcast and certify the hall feed as an acoustic performance? That is not safety cover. That is miming. If this gets out, it's my license. You'll certify what you're given, came the answer, smooth and final. The gala is in 5 days. The broadcast contracts are handled. Do your job quietly, Elsa, and do it carefully. This night is spoken for.
Anton, coiling a cable in the shadows with his back turned, went very still. The recording runs under the live feed. He had built the standard this orchestra lived by with his own hands. A live concert was not a formality, it was the whole promise. Someone above the players was preparing to tell 2,000 ticket holders and a broadcast audience across Europe that they were hearing 100 musicians play their hearts out, when in truth, they would be hearing a polished studio track, and the musicians on stage would be moving their bows over silenced strings. He wrote nothing down where anyone could see, but a cold, patient anger settled into his chest and did not leave. The man who had spoken to Elsa was Gerhard Molnar, the managing director of the hall. The smooth, silver-templed executive whose name would stand beside Sebastian's on the centenary, whose bonus and legacy wrote on the sale going through. Gerhard was everything Sebastian was not. Quiet, courteous, gracious, spoken of as the steady hand who had saved the orchestra. And that, Anton would come to understand, was exactly what made him more dangerous than any spoiled star. Sebastian broke things loudly. Gerhard broke them in a lowered, reasonable voice, with a warm hand on your shoulder, and made you feel unreasonable for hearing the crack. And the cruelty spread, the way it always does, to whoever was most exposed. That someone was Josef. It happened at the seating rehearsal. Josef Brandt, 40 years, the warmest tone in the string section, had been promised the one honor of his long career, to play the great unaccompanied cello solo at the heart of the Centenary Symphony, the slow melody that would carry the emotional center of the whole night, exactly as he had dreamed of since he was a boy sneaking into this very hall. He was drawing his bow across the opening phrase, testing it in the room, when Sebastian decided the old man was playing too slowly for his liking.
No. God, listen to him drag, Sebastian said, loud enough for the players drifting past, pulling out his phone to film. This is the emotional peak of the evening, and we've got Grandpa here taking a nap on the C string. Say something for the camera, old-timer. Nothing? He circled Josef with the phone, while the old cellist sat with his bow frozen on the string, too professional to risk a scrape be reacting, too proud to answer, his jaw tight. Anton crossed the stage before he had decided to. He stepped between the phone and the old cellist, not roughly, just decisively, and rested one hand lightly on the scroll of the cello. The pin slipped a fraction on this end pin socket. That's the drag you're hearing, not the man, he said quietly to Josef. Give me 2 seconds and it'll sing. He gave Josef a reason to lift the bow with his dignity intact and knelt to a screw that was perfectly fine. Then he stood, turned, and looked once, directly into Sebastian's phone with calm, unreadable eyes, until the young man lowered it without quite knowing why. You, Sebastian said, and his voice had gone to ice. I don't know what your problem is, piano man, but I am going to enjoy watching you carry your little toolbox out of my building. He lifted the phone again and photographed Anton's face. Smile. I'm sending this straight to Gerhard. And to the buyer.
Anton let him take the photograph. He had a feeling it would be useful later. He was right. He was not finished. Cruelty, once rewarded, always spreads to whoever is bravest, as well as whoever is weakest. And when Una quietly brought Josef a cup of tea in the band room afterward and murmured that filming him wasn't right, one of Sebastian's assistants overheard and reported it, and Sebastian turned the full weight of his boredom on the girl.
Did the little sub have an opinion?
He said, finding Una at the back of the seconds.
What's your name? No, don't bother. There's no point in learning it. You're a temp. One word from me to the fixer, and you never get another call from a professional orchestra in this country. That's how it works, sweetheart. I don't remember your name. I don't have to. That's the whole point of being me and the whole point of being you. Yuna's eyes filled, but she did not look away, and she did not apologize. Anton watched a frightened young woman hold her ground for an old man who could do nothing for her, and felt the last of his patience turn into something harder and more useful. Later, passing her chair, he said quietly, so only she could hear, "You did the right thing. And whatever you already sent to the people who needed it, you did right there too. Keep a record of what you see this week. Dates, names, exactly as it happens. And keep it somewhere that isn't this building." Yuna went very still and looked at him with something between fear and hope, and did not ask how he knew. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Anton said, "people who write things down are much harder to erase than people who stay quiet."
That evening, Anton watched the machine of it all lay itself out clean. Sebastian had not merely insulted him, he had humiliated a loyal old cellist, threatened a frightened young player, and above them both, a courteous director was quietly preparing to broadcast a recording to a continent and call it live. Because a foundation that needed the money and a star who needed the legend had decided, together, that the biggest night in 100 years was worth not asking too loudly what the audience would actually hear. He was not raging, he was charting. And a man who charts is far more dangerous than a man who shouts.
Late that night, when the stage was dark and the last of the crew had gone, Anton did two quiet things. First, he let himself up into the glass control booth, and with hands that had known sound desks since before Sebastian was born, followed the signal path the way another man reads a page. There it was, a discrete playback machine wired to feed the house speakers and the broadcast bus, cued with a full studio recording of the entire centenary program, a recording made weeks earlier in sessions the public never heard about. On the night, the master would ride under the live microphones, and if the players faltered, a hidden hand would simply lift the recording and drop the live feed. The hall would hear perfection. The hall would hear a lie. Second, he slipped the recording's opening minutes into his ear and listened the way only he could. And he caught them. A faint, cracked note from the third horn at exactly 41 seconds, and the small creak of a chair a breath later. Flaws frozen forever into the master. A live orchestra never makes the same mistake twice in the same instant. This one would make it in front of 2,000 people, identically, every time the button was pressed. And when he struck his brass fork against the desk and held it beside the recording's tuning A, he heard it. The track sat a hair flat, tuned on some tired studio afternoon to a pitch a little below the bright 4/4-3 his hall had always breathed at. He photographed the signal path, noted the time codes, and pocketed the truth. He did not yet know how far up the rot reached, but he had a feeling, and he was right. The Gala was supposed to end the way every Sebastian Falk production ended, with the orchestra nodding along, the paperwork smoothing itself out, and the centenary sweeping to a televised standing ovation. And for a day, it looked like it would. But Anton had spent 50 years learning to read an orchestra, and now, quietly, he began to read the people around it. And the story they told was uglier than any spliced-in recording. It came together in pieces, a word overheard through the control booth glass, an archive door left unlocked, and the program itself, the centerpiece of the whole Gala, billed on every poster and every broadcast trailer as the event of the century, a newly discovered symphony, composed by Sebastian Falk to crown the orchestra's 100th year. A work the press had already declared proof that the Golden Boy was not merely a conductor, but a composer to rank with the founder himself. Anton had asked, mildly, to see the score, a tuner's idle curiosity while he waited for a piano to settle.
And when Gerhard's assistant left it lying on the lid for an hour, Anton turned the pages, and the back of his neck went cold for the second time that week. Because he knew this symphony. He knew every bar of it. He had written it himself in the last silent year before he withdrew from the world, in a grief he had never spoken about to anyone, and he had sealed it in the orchestra's archive, unperformed, unpublished, meant to be found and played honestly long after he was gone. Sebastian Falk had not composed the Centenary Symphony. He had found Reinhardt's sealed final work in the archive, copied it out in his own hand, inked his own name across the title page, and dressed the theft up as the arrival of his genius.
And there, in the slow movement, buried in the inner voices where no ordinary listener would ever notice it, was the thing that turned suspicion into certainty. A small, dissonant figure that shouldn't have been there and always resolved. 3 notes, E and H, and a falling third. The old German note names spelling Elias Hoffmann. The Hoffmann turn. Anton had woven that private signature into every genuine score he had written for 50 years, a secret thank you to the teacher the world forgot, documented nowhere, explained to no one. It sat in Sebastian's original manuscript, note for note, untouched, because a thief copies what he can see and can never copy a signature he does not know is there. Because here was the thing the orchestra did not know. The foundation behind the Reinhardt Philharmonic was nearly broke. A century of prestige had been run into the ground on deficits and vanity, propped up with loans and the promise of one enormous exit, the sale of the whole institution, hall and name and history, to Roland Vassar's global entertainment group, which wanted a legendary orchestra the way it wanted any asset, as content, a brand to be licensed, streamed, and stamped on 1,000 products, and a centenary that delivered 2 headlines, a flawless world broadcast gala, and the revelation of a new genius composer to carry the name, was exactly what would drive the price into the stratosphere. Sebastian did not care whether a single note on the night was played live by a human being. He cared that 2,000 people in the hall, a continent watching at home, and one very rich buyer all believed it was. He was not alone in the lie. Gerhard Molnar, the courteous managing director, the steady hand who had saved the orchestra, had staked his reputation and a career-defining payout on the sale going through. And when the hall's own audio director brought him a problem, he did what men like Gerhard always do. He made it disappear. The problem had a name, and Anton heard it spoken through the booth glass the way he heard everything that week, by being invisible. "I ran the numbers, Gerhardt," Elsa Brenner was saying, low and desperate. "You want me to certify the broadcast feed as a live acoustic performance while a full studio master rides underneath it and the players mime over dead microphones. That's not a safety net. That's fraud. Broadcast fraud, ticket fraud, and it's my signature on the certificate and my license on the line." And Gerhardt's voice, smooth and cold and reasonable, "You'll describe it as an enhanced live presentation, which is technically true. The players will be on stage, moving, present. You will not put the word recording in a document with this hall's crest on it 3 days before the most important sale of my life, or you will discover that this is a very small profession and that audio directors who cry fraud do not work in it for long." Anton, coiling cable in the dark, went very still. There it was, in a single sentence, an honest woman who had found the truth, and a powerful man ordering her to bury it. It was Elias Hoffmann and the impresario, 50 years later, in a better suit. His teacher's whole ruin, happening again in real time, 3 days before it would cheat 2,000 people, deceive a continent, and sell his life's name to strangers on the back of a lie. And here the story turned, because Elsa Brenner did not, at first, do the brave thing. She was afraid the way people with a mortgage and a license and a daughter are afraid. And she signed the first certification Gerhard put in front of her, telling herself, Enhanced live presentation was a form of words she could sleep beside. Anton saw the moment it happened, saw the good woman fold, and did not judge her for it. He had watched fear do worse to better people. He simply noted, quietly, that Elsa had quietly copied the full playback master and the signal logs onto a drive of her own instead of wiping them as instructed. The small, stubborn act of a conscience not yet dead. A person who keeps the evidence, Anton knew, is a person still deciding which way to jump. And then they came for Joseph. Because Joseph Brandt had felt it in the last rehearsal, the monitor in the floor feeding him a cello line half breath ahead of his own bow, a recording of himself that wasn't himself, playing his sacred solo without him. He had lowered his bow, gone pale, and said aloud to the wrong person that no orchestra he had given 40 years to was going to stand on that stage and mime to a machine on the night it turned 100, and that he would not lift his bow to pretend. When the plan held and the solo was quietly reassigned to the studio track, Joseph refused to stay silent about it.
Within the hour, Sebastian had his pretext. A rare house cello, a century-old instrument worth a fortune kept in the orchestra's collection, was discovered with a cracked rib, and the damage was pinned on the old principal who had access to the instrument room and had suddenly become inconvenient. 40 years erased in a single meeting. That detail was not a small one. Joseph had been promised one thing at the end of his long career, that he would play the great unaccompanied solo at the heart of the Centenary Symphony, live, in the hall he had sneaked into as a boy. The crowning moment of a life given to a single instrument, the thing he would tell his grandchildren about. The same letter that fired him for a crack in a cello he had not touched took that away and handed his solo to a recording. So Sebastian Falk's need for a fortune had not merely humiliated an old man for playing too slowly. It had thrown away the two people, an audio director and a principal cellist, honest enough to say the night was a lie, and cleared away the last hands that might have stopped a fake from going out under the founder's name. When Anton saw Joseph carry his cello to the stage door, stopping to lay one hand flat on the doorframe he had walked through for 40 years, the way you would say goodbye to an old friend, something in him that had stayed patient all week went very still and very cold. This was the line the whole week had been walking toward. Not a cruel joke, not a filmed insult. A cellist thrown away, an engineer frightened into silence, and a machine about to sing under his own name to a hall full of people who had paid to hear the truth. He found Joseph on a bench in the loading yard, cello case across his knees, staring at the gray sky. 40 years, Joseph said. Not bitter, just lost. I taught half the cellists in this country how to find the middle of a note. He looked at the case. They promised me the solo. My first time in this hall, I was a boy who climbed a drain pipe to hear a rehearsal through a window. I wanted my last note in it to be that solo. Anton sat down beside him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Above them, somewhere in the building, the great collection of the century waited under the lights. "Joseph," he said finally, and his voice had changed. Something underneath it had gone very quiet and very hard. "I need you to trust me for one day. Don't sign whatever they send you. Don't cash anything. Be here tomorrow night in your good black with your cello and be ready to play when I come for you." "Play what, my friend? They decided. People like them always win the night." "Not this night," Anton said, and put his hand over the old man's. "One day. And after tomorrow, you will never again have to ask a boy like that for permission to matter." Then Anton walked to the quiet end of the yard, took the worn brass tuning fork from his coat pocket, and held it in his palm the way he had held it at a small and nearly empty funeral 50 years before. He thought about Elias Hoffman,
dying in a cold room while a thief conducted his stolen music to applause. He thought about a promise, and he took out an old phone and dialed the 2 numbers he had been saving all week. Dr. Ingrid Haas had been Anton Reinhardt's lawyer for 30 years and did not rattle easily. When her phone rang the night before the gala and the screen said Anton, she sat up. "Tell me what you're hearing," Ingrid said.
"A machine about to be sold as an orchestra under my name to a continent for a fortune," Anton said, and told her everything. The studio master riding under the live feed, the silenced microphones, the flat tuning and the frozen flaws, the stolen symphony with his name scratched off and Sebastian's inked on, the forged certification, the audio director frightened into signing, the cellist fired on a lie, and a boy claiming the founder's sealed final work as his own genius. When he finished, there was a short silence. "You could end this tonight," Ingrid said. "One letter. You refuse your signature. You withhold the name and the trust. The sale collapses. The gala is canceled. So tell me why you haven't." "Because a quiet letter is a bad night for them and a lesson for no one," Anton said. "I've watched this orchestra bend honest people all week, Ingrid. The rot isn't one concert. It's a boy who was taught that the name is a thing you sell and the players are a thing you switch off. If I send a letter, his lawyers bury it. The gala quietly postpones for technical reasons. And in a year, the same fraud surfaces in another deal with the same forged papers. I don't want it postponed. I want it heard, so witnessed, so undeniable, in front of so many ears that no fortune can ever again make a recording wear my name and call itself live." "Then don't make the scene," Ingrid said, and Anton could hear the old lawyer smiling. "Build the case, move quietly, and let them make the scene at their own gala." What followed over the next day was a masterclass in patience. Anton did not storm the podium or announce who he was. Working the phone from the shadow of the organ loft, he did what 50 years of music had taught him. He gathered the truth until it was too heavy for any fortune to lift.
First, the sound. Through Ingrid, he had a copy of Elsa's playback master and the signal logs placed quietly and lawfully before an independent audio forensics expert. The verdict was clean and merciless. The live broadcast feed was wired to carry a studio recording made 5 weeks earlier, complete with a fixed crack note in the third horn at 41 seconds and a chair creak a beat later. Flaws that would repeat identically every time the master played, which no living orchestra has ever done. And the whole track sat tuned a fraction flat, to a pitch below the bright 4/4/3 the hall breathed at, because it had been recorded on a different day, on different reeds, in a different room. A conductor could argue about interpretation. No one could argue with a recording that made the same mistake in the same millisecond twice. Second, the music's own body. Every genuine Reinhardt score for 50 years carried the Hoffman turn, the 3-note signature in the inner voices that Anton had never published and never explained. He was, quite literally, the only person alive who could point to it, name the notes, and prove that the Falk Symphony had been copied from a Reinhardt manuscript the thief never understood well enough to launder. Ingrid quietly secured the sealed archive, the original manuscript in Anton's hand, dated 15 years earlier, the founder's signature still on the flyleaf beneath Sebastian's fresh ink.
Third, the paper. Lawfully and without a sound, the fabricated story was preserved beside the truth. The recording session invoices, the forged enhanced live presentation certification, and Gerhardt's own messages, which a foundation council, once Ingrid made clear what was coming, was compelled to keep. Get it certified before the broadcaster's technical check. Call it enhanced live and lock the file. Nobody retests a gala once the applause is on air. Fraud, in writing, with a name on it. And beside it, the thing that turned theft into betrayal, the archive access logs, showing whose credential had opened the sealed room and when. But building a case in daylight is one thing. Staying invisible while a great institution wakes up around you is another. And here, the day turned genuinely tense. Because Roland Vassar, the man about to buy the orchestra, had not built a global entertainment empire by being careless. His due diligence team was crawling over every contract and corner of the Reinhardt Concert Hall that week. And when they heard that a temporary technician had been asking questions in the archive and making calls from quiet corners, an assistant was sent to find out who the strange old man in the gray coat really was. For an hour, the walls tightened. If anyone made one call to the right desk and learned that the piano tuner, holding a €100 million sale in his calloused hands, was Anton Reinhardt himself, the founder, the one signature the whole deal depended on, the lawyers would freeze every file, and the forged certification, the session invoices, the sealed manuscript might vanish into a shredder before anyone could secure them. Anton called Ingrid. "They're looking for me," he said. "If they learn who I am before the records are sealed, it all walks."
Then we let them find exactly what we wish them to find, Ingrid said. It was almost too easy. Anton Reinhardt had not been photographed in 15 years. He had withdrawn from the world so completely that the music press spoke of him as a recluse who might already be dead. There was no recent face to match to the name. The staffing agency confirmed to the hall only that the technician was credentialed freelance piano service. True, dull, impenetrable. While the forensics finished and Ingrid sealed the files. Reassured that the odd old man in the gray coat was just an overqualified retired tuner padding a pension, the due diligence team moved on. It was the last thing they would get wrong before the gala. Sebastian, meanwhile, made a mistake of his own. He tried to buy a witness. He had noticed the young substitute, the one with the opinion, writing in a little notebook, and it made him uneasy in a way he could not name. So he had an assistant find Una in a corridor and offer her an envelope, 3 months' fees in cash, more, to sign a short statement saying the old cellist had damaged the instrument through negligence, and that the centenary would be performed live, every note by the orchestra alone. For one long moment, Una thought about her mother, her younger brother, the rent, everything she had to lose. And then she thought about an old man in a gray coat who had told her that people who write things down are harder to erase. "No," she said. Her voice shook, but she said it. "You want the difference between me and you? I sit 10 feet from the monitor. I've heard the recording of us playing when none of us were playing." She pushed the envelope back. "I'm not for sale." She walked away on legs that barely held her and went straight to the old man in the gray coat and pressed into his hands a notebook of dates and names in careful handwriting, and, folded inside it, the thing she had been too frightened to act on for 3 weeks, her own photograph of the archive manuscript with Sebastian's name freshly inked over the founders, the same photograph that had traveled, unsigned, to a lake house. "I sent one to the Musicians' Union too," Una whispered. Anton took the notebook the way another man would take gold. That was the institution's fatal error. They had not merely faked a concert and crushed 2 honest people. They had now tried to buy a false statement from a frightened young player brave enough to refuse and honest enough to report it. The case had grown its sharpest edge, and they had handed it over themselves. The emotional low point came the next evening, in the hours before the gala. Joseph Brandt, back by the loading yard in his good black as promised, but no longer believing, called his grandson to say he might not have the concert hall story to tell after all. Anton caught only the end of it. No, it's not your fault. Your grandfather is just between things right now." And then sat with the dead phone in his lap, and for the first time, stopped believing it would come right. And Elsa Brenner found Anton by the organ loft, pale and sleepless. "I signed it," Elsa said, her voice breaking. "I told myself the words let me off. I have a daughter, a license, a mortgage. I was a coward. And now my name is on a fraud, and there's a good old man carrying his own cello out the door for a crack I could disprove with one file."
Anton looked at her for a long moment, without anger. "You copied the master, Elsa," he said gently. "You were told to wipe it, and you didn't. Cowards wipe. You were just waiting for a reason to be brave. I'm going to give you one." He stood between the frightened engineer and, in his mind, the fired cellist and the trembling young player, and made himself say the hardest sentence in the whole plan. "One more day. Give me 1 day, and then I promise you will never again have to wonder whether the truth was worth telling."
Meanwhile, on the surface, nothing had changed, which is what made the noose so tight. The certification was in the file. The stolen symphony sat on every stand with Sebastian's name on the cover. The playback master was cued in the booth, flawless and hollow. And Sebastian, in his first fitting for the white tie, was already rehearsing his triumph, filming himself beside the podium for the millions who did not know his foundation was one signature away from ruin. He caught the old man's eyes across the stage as he filmed, and smiled and mouthed, "You're finished." "You keep saying it's your orchestra," Anton said quietly, to no one, watching him from the shadows. "Say it a little louder tomorrow night." With the hall already filling for the gala, an unexpected ally walked back through the stage door. Elsa Brenner, no longer pale and folded, carrying a slim drive and a single page. That's the full playback master, the signal logs, the session invoices, and the certification Gerhard dictated, and a signed statement of everything he told me to bury, she said, setting them in Anton's hands. "I withdrew my certification an hour ago, in writing, to the broadcaster and the union. I should have done it the day he threatened me. Whatever you're about to do out there, I'll stand at that console and cut the recording the instant you give the word. And I'll say every word of this to the union, to the broadcaster, to anyone who asks." Anton looked at Elsa's drive, and Yuna's notebook, and the sealed manuscript, and the forensic report no ear could argue with, and knew the case was whole.
There was one last piece. Ingrid called him back. "It's done," she said. "The president of the Musicians' Union is an old friend of yours, and she remembers exactly whose baton gave her her first entrance. She'll be in the hall tonight, in the 3rd row, with a broadcast standards officer beside her, and on this evidence, she is prepared to state publicly that the performance is not what it claims to be, and to refer the certification for prosecution. And the sale cannot close without your name, Anton. It never could." Her voice warmed. Anton slid the phone into his coat, felt the worn brass fork against his chest, and looked out from the wings at the brightening hall, the arriving audience, the stands full of his stolen music, and a young man in white tie filming his own coronation. In a few minutes, the whole hall was going to learn who the tuner really was. The great auditorium of the Reinhardt Concert Hall blazed with light. 2,000 guests filled the red velvet tiers. The cameras of a continent's broadcaster hung in the darkness. The city's most powerful patrons lined the front rows, and above the stage, carved in gold, stood the single word, Reinhardt, that had meant an honest performance for 100 years. In the 3rd row sat Roland Vassar, chief of the entertainment group, arrived to watch the crown jewel he was about to buy. Beside him, Gerhard Molnar smoothed his silver-templed hair, and in the wings, in a plain gray coat, stood Anton Reinhardt.
The lights dropped. The applause rose. Sebastian Falk walked out to the podium under a single spotlight, bowed to a standing ovation, and lifted his baton over 100 silent musicians. He tapped the stand, and the Centenary Symphony began. The founder's stolen music, gorgeous and full, swelling out into the hall to gasps and tears, except that Anton, in the wings, was watching the bows. They were moving a hair out of time with the sound. The horns were up, but the horn line floated a breath ahead of the player's breath. And at 41 seconds, precisely, a cracked note sounded from the 3rd horn, while the 3rd horn's bell was pointed down, his valves still. Then the music softened for the great cello solo, the solo Joseph Brandt had been promised,
pouring warm and perfect out of the speakers, while the empty principal cello chair sat dark and no one played a note. And a voice from the wings said, clearly, without heat, "Stop. Stop the machine." The orchestra faltered. Heads turned. A murmur ran through the tiers. Sebastian's baton froze mid-beat, but the music kept playing, swelling on out of the speakers with no one lifting a bow for one endless damning second before a hand in the booth pulled it silent. Sebastian's face curdled as he saw who had spoken. "That's the tuner," he said, loud enough to carry, with a little laugh. "Someone get him off my stage. The poor old man's wandered up from the basement. He's confused. Get him a chair and call a doctor." "Every note you have heard tonight came out of a box," Anton said, walking out of the wings and onto his own stage, unhurried, small and steady in its gray coat. "And I would know. I wrote the first note this orchestra ever played."
And at that moment, two things happened at once. A woman rose from the third row, the president of the Musicians' Union, quietly showing her credentials, the broadcast standards officer beside her, and Anton's phone, set on the stage manager's desk, lit up on the house speakers, loud in the sudden hush. A voice came from it, clear across the whole auditorium. "This is the Musicians' Union, with the broadcast standards office present. Let the record show. The feed carried on tonight's live broadcast has been certified by no valid technical authority, and on the evidence before us was a studio recording presented as a live acoustic performance. It may not be broadcast or sold as live. Will the founder of this orchestra confirm he is present?" Roland Vassar's hand froze halfway to his program, and the old man in the gray coat reached into his pocket and drew out not a card, but the worn brass tuning fork, and struck it once against the iron frame of the piano, and let the single true A ring out across 2,000 people. "Confirmed," Anton said into the phone, not loudly, because he did not need to. "Anton Reinhardt. I founded this orchestra 50 years ago with a borrowed podium and a room full of hungry players, and my name is carved above this stage. I'm here. Not one note you heard tonight was played live, and I will not let a machine be sold to a continent under my name." And the whole hall turned the color of ash. Gerhardt gripped the edge of his seat. The stage manager set down her headset as if it had grown hot, and Sebastian Falk stood frozen on the podium, baton trembling in his hand as the pieces slammed together in his mind. The tuner. "Fetch my coffee. The people who carry the chairs. Stay out of the shot. I'll send your photo to the buyer." Every contemptuous word he had said that week, he had said to the one man on earth who could turn his fortune into a silenced room. Anton reached the podium and turned to the hall. And here, he did the thing that made it undeniable. Not with a screen, not with a slideshow, but with the one instrument every person in that room was born with. "You don't have to take my word for any of this," he said. "You have ears. Use them." He beckoned, and from the wings walked Joseph Brandt in his good black, cello in hand, and behind him Una Park with her violin, and a dozen of the orchestra's oldest players who had quietly agreed to stay. Joseph sat in the dark principal chair, set his end pin, and Anton lifted a hand. "Play me the opening of the slow movement, just as it is, live." And Joseph drew his bow, and the great cello solo poured out into the hall, warm, human, breathing, each phrase alive with the tiny, honest imperfections of a man playing at the edge of his heart. 2,000 people heard it, and the hair stood up on their arms. Then Anton nodded to the booth. "Now play them the recording, the same bars." And Elsa, at the console, lifted the studio master, and the same solo poured out of the speakers, note for note, but glassy, identical, dead. And at its edge, faint but unmistakable now that they were listening, the same cracked horn and the same chair creak frozen in the same place.
A living orchestra never plays a phrase the same way twice, Anton said. A recording makes the same mistake in the same instant, every time. You just heard the difference between 100 hands and a button. A gasp moved through the tears like wind through wheat. Then he did something no forger could answer. He struck the brass fork again, the true A, bright and clean, and had Elsa hold it against the recording's tuning note. The track sat a shade flat, sour against the folk. A whole orchestra recorded on a tired afternoon in another room. This hall has breathed at the same pitch for 100 years, Anton said. That box doesn't even know what key it's lying in.
Now here is what the ear can't catch on its own, Anton said, and Elsa Brenner stepped out of the booth, drive and page in hand. Steady now. Frau Brenner is the audio director this institution frightened into signing. She laid the forensic report and the signal logs on the stage manager's desk and connected a call on the house speakers to the independent forensics expert. A voice filled the hall. Confirmed independently this afternoon, the broadcast feed carried a studio master recorded 5 weeks ago with fixed repeating artifacts and a tuning below the hall's reference. It is not a live acoustic performance. Elsa set the physical logs on the desk for anyone to see. I tested it twice, she said. I signed one certification out of fear, and I withdrew it this evening. Then, the broadcast standards officer stepped forward and one by one laid the documents flat on the desk. No projector, just paper under the stage lights, passed hand to hand along the front rows. The recording session invoices, the forged enhanced live presentation certification, Gerhard's own messages in his own words. Call it enhanced live and lock the file. And beside them, Anton laid 2 things together. His sealed archive manuscript, dated 15 years earlier in his own hand, and the Falk score from the stands. This is the symphony he told you he composed, Anton said. And this is the manuscript it was copied from. My final work, sealed in that archive before this young man could read an orchestral score that no one was ever meant to see until I was gone. Look at them, side by side. He did not compose a note. He robbed a dead man's drawer. He only made the mistake of robbing one who isn't dead yet. And Una, the young substitute, stepped forward, chin level, and set her notebook beside the papers, open to the page. I sit by the monitor, she said. I heard us play when none of us were playing, and they offered me money last night to sign that it was live. I said no.
The hall read it all in silence. Real sound, real paper, real handwriting, the true note still hanging in the air. And somewhere in the tears, a patron said, very quietly, "We were about to buy a recording." And then, before Anton could go on, Sebastian found his voice, and it came out as mockery, because mockery was the only armor he had ever needed. "This is theater," he said, laughing, turning to the hall, to the cameras. "A senile old tuner and a disgruntled cellist. My name is on this program. I have the titles, I have the contract, and I will not have my centenary hijacked by..." He gestured at Anton. "By the help."
Anton let him finish. Then he stepped onto the podium the young man had shoved downstage, lifted the founder's own baton from its case beside the stand, turned to the 100 living players, and raised it. "The truth doesn't need a microphone," he said. And he gave the smallest upbeat, and the great living orchestra, the reinstated old players, Josef, Una, all of them, breathed in together and played the opening of the Centenary Symphony live for the first time all night. The founder's music, sung by the founder's hands under the founder's baton, imperfect and enormous and true. And in the slow inner voices, Anton lifted one finger and pointed, and let the 3 quiet notes ring out where everyone could finally hear them.
That figure there, the one that shouldn't be there and always resolves. 3 notes, E, H, and the fall. It spells the name of the teacher who took a starving boy off a station floor and taught him what a true note costs. Elias Hoffman. I have hidden it in every honest score I have written for 50 years. I never published it. I never explained it. He looked at Sebastian, almost with pity. It's in your manuscript, note for note. You couldn't even understand what you stole well enough to erase that it was mine. You cannot counterfeit a hand, Sebastian. Gerhardt tried once more, smooth even now. Maestro Reinhardt, whatever your history with this hall, you have no operational role. The sale is a private matter, and the sale needs my signature, Herr Molnar, Anton said. It always did. I never gave away my own name, and I am not going to lend it to a lie tonight.
And here Roland Vassar rose, but he did not bluster, and he did not beg, and he did not, as a lesser man might, try to buy the founder on the spot. He did something colder and quicker. He cut his losses and reached for a lifeboat. Maestro, on behalf of my group, I am appalled, Vassar said, his voice pitched for the cameras and the record, turning smoothly to face the broadcast lens. We entered these discussions in complete good faith. If what you say is true, then my company has been defrauded as gravely as this audience, misled by Herr Molnar and Herr Falk about the very nature of what we were acquiring. He was already gesturing his lawyers to their feet, already recasting himself in real time from buyer to victim, distancing his brand from the wreckage before the applause could curdle into a headline with his name in it. No comment beyond that. Anton watched him maneuver, and for the first time that night, something almost like a dry smile touched his mouth. "You'll forgive me if I don't thank you for your outrage, Herr Vassar," he said. "You spent 3 weeks and a team of accountants inspecting this orchestra, and the one thing none of you thought to check was whether it could still play. You didn't want an orchestra. You wanted a logo with a good story. The good story just walked onto the stage and turned out to be 100 people you never bothered to meet." Vassar had no answer for that. He simply buttoned his coat and made for the side door with his lawyers, already on the phone, already a wronged party, which, Anton reflected, was its own kind of confession. Then he looked last at Sebastian. And Sebastian Falk, who had never in his life been refused, came apart, but not quietly. "I made this orchestra matter again. I put it back on magazine covers. I filled these seats. Without me, you're a museum nobody visits." He wheeled to the players behind him and stabbed his baton at them. "Play!" And not one bow lifted. Josef set his cello upright and folded his hands over the scroll. Una laid her violin in her lap. One by one, down the whole 100, the players lowered their instruments and simply looked at him, and the silence they made was louder than any recording. Panicking, Sebastian jabbed the button on the stand himself, and the studio master blared to life out of the speakers, that dead, perfect sound. And there he stood, conducting furiously at an orchestra that would not play, waving his arms at a machine, until Anton lifted one hand to Elsa and she cut the power, and the recording died mid-phrase, and the great hall fell into true, total silence, with Sebastian Falk still beating time at nothing at all. He lowered the baton. He looked around the hall for one face that would stand with him, his name on the program, the orchestra his family's money ran, 2,000 people who had come to crown him, and found Vassar gone, and Gerhard staring at the floor, and 100 musicians with their instruments in their laps. And in that silence, in his beautiful white tie, Sebastian Falk understood something that would outlast every headline. He had spent his whole life in front of orchestras, and not one of the 100 people behind him would play a single note for him now, because he had never once, in all his fame, treated a single one of them as anything but furniture. The baton slipped from his fingers and clattered on the podium.
And when the stage manager and a union officer came for him, he did not rage. He had nothing left. He let them turn him toward the wings, small and silent, a young man who had been refused by an entire hall at once. Anton watched him go, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost gentle.
"You kept asking me all week which one I was," he said. "A name that goes on the poster or one of the hands that carries the chairs? That was never the question. An orchestra doesn't become great because the man on the podium waves hardest. It becomes real when 100 people who will never fit on a poster give you their honest hands for 2 hours and are willing to lower them when the music becomes a lie. You can counterfeit the applause, Sebastian. You cannot counterfeit a single honest note." He set the brass fork down on the podium beside the fallen baton. "And none of this had to be your ruin. If you'd let the old cellist keep his solo, or listen to your own audio director, or been decent to the girl who sits by the monitor, you'd have conducted a smaller, honest concert and lived to build a real career. You were handed one of the last great orchestras on earth." But Anton was not finished, because a good ending is never only about who falls. It is about who finally gets to rise. And here, he did not reach for his checkbook, because some debts are not paid in money. He turned to Joseph Brandt, sitting in the principal chair with his cello.
"Joseph," he said, "I'm sorry it took so long." He raised his voice for the hall. "This man gave 40 years to this orchestra and was thrown away on a lie so a boy wouldn't have to hear the word recording. He has played more true notes in this hall than the men who fired him will ever hear." Then Anton stepped off the podium and held out the founder's baton, not to a manager, not to a star, but to the old cellist. But that's justice, and justice isn't a gift. This is the gift. The Centenary Symphony was written to be premiered honestly, one day by the finest hands in this room. Those are yours. So play us the solo, Joseph. Live, tonight. Your bow, your sound. In the hall you climbed a drain pipe to hear as a boy. I'll hold the beat." And the old man could not speak at all. He simply set his bow to the string, and Anton lifted the baton. And Joseph Brandt played the great solo he had been promised, live, for 2,000 people and a continent. And it was worth more than every euro Roland Wasser had ever offered, because no one on earth could buy it, fake it, or take it away from him again. Then Anton found Una, standing with her violin. "You were punished this week for the crime of hearing the truth," he said, loud enough for the union still on the line. "That ends tonight. But I'm not going to hand you a prize either. You don't need my charity. You need a chair." He turned to the concertmaster. "Move her up. Tonight she plays inside the section, not at the back of it. And next season she auditions for a permanent seat like anyone with her ear should, on the strength of her playing, from people who will never once ask her to mime a note." Una pressed the violin to her chest and nodded, unable to speak.
"And Frau Brenner," Anton said, "who found the truth, lost her nerve, and then found something rarer than nerve, the courage to undo her own mistake, runs the sound in this hall from tonight, with the authority to stop any performance that isn't honest." Elsa wiped her eyes and nodded. Then Anton stood alone at the center of his stage, under the gold letters, and struck the brass tuning fork one last time, and let the true A ring out into the silence. "There will be no sale," he said simply. "I'm placing this orchestra and its name in a trust owned by the people who actually make the music, the 100 hands, so that no heir with a good suit and an empty score can ever again switch them off and sell the silence." That was the promise I made at a poor man's funeral 50 years ago.
It took me long enough to keep it. He looked out at the hall. Elias Hoffman died believing his music didn't matter because a thief had put his own name on it. So tonight, we play his student symphony under the only name that was ever true. And we play it live. The hall, which had held its breath, finally let it go. The players were on their feet. A patron began to applaud, and then the whole auditorium rose. 2,000 people standing not for a golden boy on a magazine cover, but for 100 honest hands and the old man in the gray coat who had spent 50 years protecting them. At the edge of it, quietly, the union officer was speaking with Gerhard Moller, who was no longer smooth at all, and Roland Wasser was already gone. Sebastian was gone.
Late that night, when the audience had left and the great chandeliers were dimmed and the playback machine sat unplugged and bagged as evidence, Anton Reinhardt walked the length of his empty stage alone, and then, out of pure habit, sat at the concert grand, struck his fork, and tuned a single string that had drifted a hair flat under the lights, nudging the pin until the note sat perfectly still in the air. He didn't do it because anyone was watching. He did it because that, in the end, was the whole point. In the weeks that followed, though the world would only ever share that one incandescent night in the hall, everything rolled out just as Anton had promised. The broadcast was pulled and became the opening exhibit in a fraud investigation that reached Sebastian, Gerhard, and the recording contractors, because selling a continent a recording labeled live is not a matter of taste, but of law. Roland Wasser's group spent a long season explaining to its own board how its due diligence had missed a founder tuning a piano in the wings. Elsa Brenner ran the hall's sound with a spine of steel and never again signed a thing she couldn't prove. Una Park won a permanent seat on her playing, and still, at the start of every concert, tuned to the note and not to the person beside her. Josef Brandt played another decade, told his grandchildren the story 100 times, and got his name back with interest. And Anton Reinhardt, rather than sell the orchestra to anyone, handed its name and its future to the musicians themselves, and then, mostly, went back to his lake house, though he was known to turn up now and then, unannounced, in a gray coat, to tune the piano before a concert. By ear. The honest way.
Sebastian Falk had a famous name, a podium, and a father's fortune behind him. Josef Brandt had a cardboard box, a frozen pension, and 40 years of treating every note and every person as though it mattered. Only one of them still had his dignity when the lights came up. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. Was Anton right to sign on quietly as the tuner and let the whole ugly week play out? The fired cellist, the frightened girl, the forged papers, before he revealed who he was? Or should he have refused his signature and killed the sale with one phone call the day that recording reached his lake house? Tell me below. And be honest about this one too. We have all, at least once, looked straight through the person who tunes the piano, or carries the chairs, or fixes the sound, and quietly decided they didn't count. If you believe the most valuable thing in that hall was never the name on the poster, that it was 100 pairs of hands nobody thought to look at, and one true note that no fortune can buy, or fake, or sell, then subscribe and stay for the next one. Because next time, we're walking into a world-famous chateau on the night of its 200th Harvest Gala, where the celebrated young master winemaker who just inherited the estate humiliates the silent old cellar hand rinsing barrels in the dark, never once imagining that the stooped figure with the tasting cup is the legendary vigneron whose palate built every great vintage the family ever sold, and whose name is burned into every cask in that cellar. You won't believe how that one ends.